Hey programmers, what is going on? I'm the Savage Coder, and it is time for episode 23. We're continuing our dive into the JWT Token Authentication. Today we get to lock down our APIs with our tokens and actually add some real security. Before we do that, we're going to take a look at that crypto library that was left over from .NET and convert that into something we can use in .NET Core. I think that'll be kind of interesting because we have to manually set it up. So let's check that out. But first, all right, as always, you can find the code at github.com/noblecausecode. So we're using this crypto helper to verify our encrypted passwords, and the version that we're using is giving us warnings, and that's because the system.web.helpers.crypto is actually part of the .NET framework, and we're working in .NET 5, which is based on .NET Core. So let's start by converting that. If you need help getting the code for this or any episode, check out the card above that explains how to do that. If you look in the API under user service, you can see this line that uses the hash password when we add a new user to our site. We also have to verify that password when a user logs in, and we do that here with the crypto.verify hashed password. When we build this project, though, I get this warning down here that says system.web.helpers.crypto 3.2.3 was restored using the .NET Framework 4.6.1. And since we're not using the .NET Framework, I want to get that out of there so that we don't have to rely on framework bits. Even though it seems to be working, there's no guarantee that's going to continue working. So there is no direct replacement for this crypto library under system.web.helpers.crypto. Luckily, though, Microsoft has published all of their code as open source, so we can go take a look at how the code worked, and we can bring it into our own project. So I'm going to first go to their GitHub site, which I already went and looked up, so you don't have to watch me search for it. But if you just search for GitHub and ASP.NET, you can find yourself into this ASP.NET web stack, and then the source directory, and then system.web.helpers. And if you look in that system.web.helpers, there is this crypto.cs that we can look at. So this is pretty much all we're going to need. There is going to be one problem that I see, and I'm going to let that happen by itself. So let's go ahead and move this class into our own crypto. And since they called it helpers, I'm going to go ahead and call it helpers in our project as well. So I'm just going to right click, add a new folder, and we'll just call it helpers. And then inside there, I'm going to add a class, and I'm going to name it the same thing they named theirs, which is crypto. And that way, we'll be able to use a noble cause savage cell API.helpers.crypto, and the rest of the call, the code, will still be crypto dot. It'll just be coming from our namespace's crypto class instead of the system.web.helpers crypto class. So really what we're looking to do is replace this code, and we'll grab the usings that they used for theirs, and let's bring that in. So first I'm going to grab all these usings, and I'll even grab their copyright because it is open source, so we can give them credit for writing this code. I certainly didn't write it. I'm just kind of lifting it here. So then everything inside, one thing I do have to change here is this class is static. And with that being static, we'll be able to just type crypto dot one of these static methods rather than having to make a new crypto class. So I'm just going to grab from public static class crypto down to the bottom, and I'm just going to copy that. I'm not going to copy this last curly brace because that's part of the namespace up here. All right, hopefully that is big enough. But all I'm doing is copying this crypto class. And I'm just going to replace the guts of my crypto with their crypto. So immediately we have some convert issues, but I can add the using statement for system. And that got rid of all but 2 errors. I'm looking at these little red marks over here to know that I have 2. So the first one looks like it's around here, maybe off the screen. There it is this helpers resource crypto not supported hash algorithm. Looks like maybe a constant or some kind of a thing. What's it doing here? It's throwing an exception, and it's doing a string dot format. So this is probably going to be some string values that algorithm is going to get placed into. So we'll figure that out right now. The other error is this using system.web.helpers.resources. So I think what we should do, since we have their code, we should find this namespace, system.web.helpers.resources, and we should look for this crypto not support. I'm just going to copy that for now. And if we look at system.web.helpers.resources, let's go back. We're already in system.web.helpers, so let me click back to that. There's resources. And I thought there was going to be, oh, I see. So this resx file is for internationalization. This is where you store your strings for different languages. So in this case, it's just going to be English because there's only one resx file. So if I go in there, this looks like a bunch of, okay, so here's a key and then the value. So let me just search for that. Oh, it's right there in front of me. So this is just a string, like a key, and it will look up this string right here. So I think what we can do is we can just make our own constant with this value because we're not going to be reusing that. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to make a private const string, and I'm going to give it that same name. And then let's go back to there and just kind of copy this message. Okay, so there. So you can see the curly brace 0 curly brace here is part of that string format. If that exception is thrown, it's going to say the hash algorithm, and then probably the name of the algorithm will go here, is not supported, valid values are SHA-256, and so on. So now we just have to grab this variable or constant and go back to our error. And instead of grabbing it from helper resources, I just want to use that constant name. And now we are left with one error. We no longer need this because we could have copied that whole resx file in, but since it's just one string, I think we're okay. And let's see if that builds. So now I'm going to go under dependencies, package. I'm going to find this system web helpers.crypto and I'm going to remove it. Okay. And now if I build, we're going to get errors because we're still pointing to that old one. But now I can use that to jump right to the errors. And this time, if I hover crypto, I can use the noble cause Savage Cell API helpers. I have no more errors and no more warnings about .NET stuff. So we'll have to test that, but I suspect that it's the same code. It was just never compiled for .NET Core. So problem solved. All right, let's move on to locking down this API. If you remember, we were allowing users to get this token, and we would pass in the email and password and return a token. Now what we're going to do is we want to require calls to our API to have that token. So there's a few things we have to do. And I'm going to play around with this ping controller just so that we can use it as an example. So I'm going to copy and paste our ping, and we're going to call it get protected ping. And this one, we will call it protected ping. All this is doing is returning the response pong. If I run this, okay, so if I run ping, I get my response of pong. And if I call protected ping, we should probably change that message to protected pong. Let's do that just so we can verify we're getting the right protected pong. So you see that even though I called it protected, there's nothing protecting this endpoint. Anybody, including any client or any application, can call protected ping, and I get back protected pong. So how do we really protect it? Well, I'm going to go above this API. I'm going to add an attribute called authorize. Authorize is part of the Microsoft Asp Net Core authorization, so we have to bring in that using statement. And now if I run this, so if I run this, it's no longer working. It's giving me a 500. The reason it's giving me a 500 is because I told the API that I want it to authorize all calls to this API, but I never told it what authorization mechanism to use. Am I authenticating against Google or Facebook or Microsoft? Am I using my own JWT tokens? I haven't told it anything. I just said it shouldn't allow anonymous, but I didn't tell it how to authenticate. So we have to set that up before it knows whether to allow or deny. So let's do that. We do that in the startup under configure services. So I'm going to do this right at the top because this is the first thing I want it to do. And it actually does process these in the order that we type them. What we're doing is we're kind of injecting our code into the pipeline process of processing a request. So I'm going to add authentication. And the type of authentication is going to be JWT bearer defaults dot authentication scheme. And if I bring that in, it will complete that for me. Again, this is part of Asp Net Core authentication.jwt bearer, which we included with NuGet last episode. So now I can default to the authentication scheme. So I'm basically telling this thing, hey, you're going to be receiving a JWT token, and we're going to use the standard authentication system for validating those kinds of tokens. But we need to tell it more. So we're going to add JWT bearer. And this is where we're telling it that you need to expect a bearer token and you need to authenticate that token. And we're going to tell it now what is a valid token. So it gives us access to these options that we can use. So what we can do is we can tell it to look at certain parameters in the token, and if those are good, then we're valid. So I'm going to use this options object, and I'm going to have it look into the token validation parameters. Let's bring in this namespace instead of all of that. That's better. And now we can just start telling it things like validate issuer equal true. So what does that mean? That means that when we created our in the service, when we created our token, remember, we told it who the issuer was and who the audience is. So if we tell it what a valid issuer is, what a valid audience is, then it can look at the incoming token and it can compare those values. So I also want it to validate the audience. I want it to validate the lifetime. I think it's lifetime. I want it to validate the issuer signing key. So these are all things that we set in our token: the issuer, the audience, when it expires, and the signing key that we created the credentials with. So now if we're telling it, I want to validate the issuer, then we have to tell it what a valid issuer is. So a valid issuer is (44325). So when we create our token, if you remember, we set the issuer and the audience. So we can now check that when we receive a token from our website or from any client to our API, we require that call to have a token. We look at the token, and if the issuer was not localhost 44328, then it probably didn't come from me or from this site, so I should deny that request. So I can also do the same thing for a valid audience. And that has the same value. And last but not least, we told it to validate the issuer signing key. So now we have to give it a new symmetric security key. And this is just, I can actually copy this from, I can copy this right here. I can bring in system.text. So one thing we're missing here is this JWT signing key, which is a private constant for now. And I'm going to copy this little comment I added that says remove this, because we cannot leave this here. But for now, it's okay as a learning exercise. So now we have our signing key that was used to sign the token. And let's wrap that so you can read it. So now what we've done is we've told our application that you're going to use authentication. It's going to be a JWT bearer. And we want you to look at the token parameters. And we're telling you what we require for it to be true. So if the issuer, the audience, if it's expired, if the signing key is not this key, then it's not a valid token. So now if we run this same thing without changing anything, and I call the protected ping, now instead of a 500 error, I get back a 401 unauthorized, meaning you don't have permission to call this endpoint because you told me to authorize it and you told me it was going to require a token and your token is invalid or missing. And in our case, it's missing. I have not sent any tokens. So I'm going to go back to last week's call where I asked for a token. Remember, I sent a body of my email and my password. And when I send that, I can get a token back. And the reason I can call API token is because there's no authorize on here. If I want to be explicit about it, I can also put allow anonymous. And that says this endpoint does not require a token. Now I can also put this allow anonymous or the authorized tag up here by the API controller on the next line, and that would require that every action in this controller would be anonymous or would be requiring authorization. And then I could use this allow anonymous to be an exception. So my ping now has authorized and my token allows anonymous. So I already have my token here. So I'm going to grab that token and copy it. And then I'm going to go back to my protected ping here, and I'm going to add a header, an authorization header. And the value of this is bearer space and then my token. And now that I'm passing this bearer token, and if you remember in our API startup, we told it that we were using bearer defaults, and that authentication scheme is defined to have the word bearer and a space here. So as long as you have the authorization bearer and you send it, it's still unauthorized. Why? I added content type application JSON. I'm still getting a 401, and I just realized why. I forgot to go down into the configure and tell it to use authentication. We're using authorization here, but we're not using authentication. So I'm going to put it at the top as well, just below this development stuff. I'm just going to do an app.use authentication. Stop Visual Studio and restart. And it should work now. So no other changes, send, and it's still unauthorized. Why? Okay, by process of elimination, I stopped the video and I just started flipping these to false, and I realized right now, before I even fixed it, that my port on my valid issuer is 44325. But if you look at the Postman, I'm sending to 44328. So I actually have the wrong port here. So let me uncomment that. And so it really was invalid. I told it to validate the issuer had to be localhost 4432, and I put a 5, but when I created my token, I had 44328, and since they don't match, it said it's invalid as it should have. So let me put these back to true and run it. And I did get a valid answer back, but we'll run it again. And it hasn't been 30 minutes, so my bearer token is still good. And so now I get a 200 OK because I'm sending it a valid token. So now you see that there is no way to call this endpoint without passing a valid token. Let's go ahead and fix our API because I removed some code that was returning the list of products. So if we go into the product repository, I'm just making an empty list of product and returning that. Let's check the database and make sure that we have a stored procedure to call. And then what we'll do is we'll lock down this call from the API and be able to see our list of products. So I have an items get. Let's see what that is. Okay, STP items get. So I'll just keep that around for a second. And we already have code that calls our database. So I'm going to grab the whole try catch. And this is actually a get, which is good because we're getting products. Let's stop our code so we can get rid of all the green lines. and bring in our using statements. Dynamic parameters is part of Dapper, and I don't believe our database procedure, it doesn't take any parameters, so we don't even need the parameters. So I'll get rid of those two, and parameters will just pass null. It is a stored procedure, but it looks like I need system.data to get that namespace. And query async needs our model. So the model in this case is going to be this product. Let's take a look at product for a second. So it's got these ID, title, description, image, location, and price. So those are not exactly the names coming back from our database. So we would either have to map those or change the names. I'm going to change the names in the stored procedure since we're just making this now. So those are the names that we need. So I can say select item ID as ID, and user ID, I don't even need that one. Title is fine, description is fine, image is fine, location, and then asking price as price, and I'll execute that. So now when we run it, the names of the columns are going to match these names of the product, and so it will be able to populate that product. So we need this to be async so that we can use the await keyword. And so this name is wrong. We need items get. I think we're pretty good. So we don't want results first or default. We want all the results, which is going to be an IEnumerable of product, which is what we're returning here is a list, which is an IEnumerable. We could make that IEnumerable if we wanted to make it a little safer so that the list couldn't be manipulated, but I think that's okay. And this needs to be a task. And we'll have to modify this interface of get products to match what we just changed. So get products now looks like this. And cannot implicitly convert, so we have to do a toList on this. And the where clause here, what don't you like? Oh, we have to make this async task of product. Let's change that on the interface. And now we can call await so that we get back our list, and then we can filter our list if we need to. So let's try this one, and we're going to call products get. So it's API products with a get. So I'm going to copy that. Do a new one, and API API products. Could not send request. Connection refused. There were errors. It's not running. What happened? Oh, so our service is not expecting back a task. So all of this needs to be async task, because we're now calling a database. Async task. And we'll bring in our threading namespace if I can get this little light bulb to go. And now let's change these interfaces as well on the product service. So this one's get products. And this one is get product. We also need to bring in the namespace for task. So now we're happy there. And we just have to await these calls. And now whatever calls these also needs to be async. So get product and get products from the service is going to be called from the controller. So if we go into there with our products, we want this to be async task. So we just follow that pattern all the way up the tree. And our calls are now awaited. And let's see if we build here. Yep. Okay, let's try that again. Send. And we get our list of products from the database. Cool. Now that that's working, let's run our UI. And if all goes well, we should get our products list. We do. We don't have the pictures hooked up because those were hard-coded before. So we'll have to fix the pictures. At least we're getting something. And what I want to do is protect that call. So if I go back to the API, into the products get, I can make that a private endpoint without a token by bringing in the authorize attribute. And so now if we run this again and refresh that page, it's going to actually blow up because there's no token being sent to the API to get this list of products. Right? So it blows up and you can see we're not trapping it anywhere, but it says the call failed with a 401 unauthorized when calling API products. So what we have to do is in our UI code, and I'll hard code it for the moment. If I go and let's just get a fresh token here. So if I get that token, actually let's grab it with the quotes because I'm going to need it. The quotes, and here is the call to get products. It's calling out to the API. What I can do with Floral here is I can tell it with OAuth bearer token, and I can just give it the token. And so now, and obviously we'll have to come up with a better solution than this. But now when I load the website, it should pass that bearer token to the API and I get my list of products again. You can see how we've locked down our API that unless you log in with a valid email and password and get a bearer token and pass that token to the API where the endpoints are secured, you're not going to be able to talk to that API without that valid token. So I think this is a good place to stop for this episode. We've shown how to get around some limitations of things that disappear in the framework, how you can bring code in yourself with the crypto. We talked about how to get a bearer token and how to use that token. We talked about adding some middleware that verifies and validates the token that's being sent to it. And we hard-coded a token from our website so that it sends it and it's authorized within our API. The next episode is going to be all about cleanup and getting this bearer token system working without hard-coding the values. We're going to get our secrets out of our code and out of Git so we can secure the whole project. We'll take all of the secrets out of our code so that bad actors can't come in and compromise our system. So until then, I hope this was really cool. This is exactly how it works. You don't have to remember any of this stuff. All of this stuff is out there. You can Google it. You can copy it from my GitHub. This is not anything proprietary. This is the standard way of doing JWT authentication. So definitely copy and paste this stuff, get it into your projects, and have fun with it. And hopefully you learned something. If you did, please subscribe. I greatly appreciate the support. And practice, practice, practice. This stuff will become second nature the more you do it. I look forward to the next episode where we solidify these concepts and move on to building our secure website. So until then, and until next time, I will see you online.